What's up, guys? You're watching Li-Fi TCG. Another Pauper deck profile for you. Not a deck that I've covered before, but a deck that has recently come into the spotlight with Guilds of Ravnica. This is Blue-Black Mystical Teachings. So, as you can probably figure out just by reading the card, Mystical Teachings, this is a blue-black base control deck that operates mostly at instant speed. It doesn't play any creatures, so you dodge a lot of removal that your opponents might have that way. And the new addition from Guilds of Ravnica to this archetype, which people have been quite excited about for the Pauper format, is Devious Cover-Up. So what this card does is it's a 4-mana counterspell. It can counter any spell. It exiles the spell that you counter, and you shuffle in 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. So Pauper doesn't really have any kind of elixir of immortality effect, right? This is a effect that's been used by control decks in the past to prevent themselves from decking and keep your own deck full of interaction. So, you know, eventually you'll keep drawing cards, you'll keep countering and removing your opponent's threats, and your opponent will just mill out. But Pauper has never had that kind of shuffle cards into your library effect before. Elixir is uncommon. Felden's Cane is common in paper, but not online, and it exiles itself, so you can only use it once. As long as you have more than one Devious Cover-Up, when you resolve the second one, you can target the first one and shuffle that back into your library and just keep looping them. This is an interaction that people obviously have used in the Guilds of Ravnica limited format as well, because there are various blue control decks that are quite viable in that set to draft. So yeah, so this Devious Cover-Up card has really pushed this teachings archetype to the forefront of a lot of people's imagination. So before Devious Cover-Up existed, people were using a few different options as win conditions. So one option is Evincar's Justice buyback with Pristine Talisman for life gain, and I'm still using that in this deck as well. The problem with that is it's not a very good win condition versus burn, because you don't want to be damaging yourself with the Evincar's Justice, and it's quite slow, so against some decks you can still deck, and it's quite exploitable as well, trying to resolve a 7-mana sorcery, just to have that as your only win condition. So that wasn't ideal. Some decks played things like Curse of the Bloody Tome, which is okay. It's like a very good win condition in control mirrors, but the problem is that you are putting non-interactive cards in your deck. Like if you're trying to be the control deck, you're trying to remove and counter your opponent's threats, like the Curse of the Bloody Tome just doesn't do anything. It's a blank effectively. And then you had the problem that if you drew it in your last few cards, you could still potentially deck yourself, because it wouldn't mill your opponent enough times before you drew out of all your own cards. So that was also an issue. Not that it was necessarily bad, like some people did have some success with it, but there was just some flaws with that card. And then some people played like a no win condition version, so they still play Buyback Justice, but rather than worry about decking themselves, they play like a 80 card main deck. And in some ways this is good, because you can play a lot of like weird Mystical Teachings targets main deck and not worry about drawing them too often. And it'll also fix the problem of decking. Like you would basically never deck out before anybody else when your library has 80 cards in it. The problem with this is just that like it's not very consistent. Like you still are going to draw those silver bullet instants at some times when you don't want them. If you have an 80 card deck, it just increases the variance on your openers, so you're more likely to have like a hand with 5, 6, or 7 lands in it, or just like an unkeepable hand because you drew the wrong mix of lands and spells. And you also draw your good cards less often. So you have like your 4 Counterspell, your 4 Dimir Aqueduct that you want to draw very frequently, and if you're playing 80 cards in your main deck, that's just not going to happen as often. So being able to play 60 cards and without any win conditions basically, and with the cover up to prevent you from decking, is a new angle that the strategy has not previously had before. And the cover up, like a 4 mana cancel, is obviously not ideal, but the exile clause on it is surprisingly relevant. People have often thought that control decks in this format have had a really bad Tron matchup, which is probably true, but being able to sort of like permanently put a stop to like a flicker loop or a pulse of Marasa Chain by exiling part of it certainly gives you an angle in that matchup that you didn't really have before. So I'll just run through the list quickly now. This is mostly my own list. Obviously it's taken some inspiration from the list that have done well elsewhere, but I've tested it and I'm pretty happy with all of these cards. There's nothing that I'm playing but it's just like, oh, this other list had it, so I put it in, and I haven't really figured out if it's good or not. So I'll just get into the list now. So I have, with the lands, 3 basic swamp, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 basic islands. In total I'm playing 23 lands. I think that's a good number. You want to hit a lot of land drops in this deck, because you're a control deck with a lot of mana requirements and a lot of mana sinks in terms of like Teachings Flashback and so forth. But you don't want to play too many lands because you do have a few cantrips, and unlike the control decks in Standard and so on, you have 4 Dimir Aqueduct, so this can help you hit your land drops. You don't need to play that many lands. So we have 4 Aqueduct, 4 Backwater, of course, the other best with actual land, and then 2 Dimir Guildgate. I'm not 100% sure about these. Possibly they should just be basic islands or Terramorphic Expanse, because this is better in terms of the mana that it gives you with compared to Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds. Because if you play Evolving Wilds, you have to, it's effectively a land that comes into play tapped, right? But it only gives you island or swamp. Like you have to commit whether you want blue or black for the rest of the game, while the Guildgate will always be able to give you either one. The reason why the Guildgate is a little bit annoying is because you have a lot of come into play tap lands with your 4 Backwater as well. So if you have a hand of like Aqueduct, Guildgate, you go turn 1 Guildgate, turn 2 Aqueduct, turn 3 play the Guildgate again. So like now, for example, you can't cast a Counterspell, but if this was Evolving Wilds, you could go turn 1, crack Evolving Wilds, find island, so this is an island, turn 2 Aqueduct, return island, and then turn 3 play island, and now you do have Counterspell. So even though your mana, your colours of mana is a little bit more constrained, in terms of tempo you're a bit ahead because you have effectively fewer come into play tap lands, even though Guildgate and Evolving Wilds are both kind of like come into play tap lands. So that's just something to be aware of. If I was going to change the mana base, that would be the first direction I would look at to be doing that. And then we also have 2 Radiant Fountains and 1 Bojuka Bog. So because you're a control deck that aims to like trade 1-for-1 a lot, graveyard recursion can be a bit of a problem, so having 1 Bojuka Bog is pretty useful for a slot that doesn't really take much commitment. And extra life gain, because you're only a 2-color deck and your color requirements aren't too strict, you can afford to play some extra life gain on your lands. And of course you can, with all these lands that have come into play abilities, you can bounce them and replay them with the Aqueduct, so you get extra triggers that way. So 23 lands, onto the spells. So for the non-interactive spells, we have most of the spells in the deck are interactive because we're a control deck, but we do have a few draw and tutoring options. So we of course have the 4 mystical teachings, 4 think twice, 3 Pristine Talisman, and 1 Whispers of the Muse. So mystical teachings just finds all of the removal counters. Well, that's basically all there is to it, right? Removal encounters. Gives you anything you need for that particular moment, and it's also card advantage when you flash it back. If you're like relatively new to Pauper, or Magic in general or whatever, because this is, I guess, quite a popular cube card, or it was popular in Time Spiral Standard. One of the things you can do with Mystical Teachings is you cast Mystical Teachings and you search for another Mystical Teachings. So usually that's the play you want to make, like if your opponent's not pressuring you too much. It just like lets you chain through more cards in your deck, find more answers. Eventually your opponent will be in a position where they can't really resolve any threat. And Think Twice is really good, just as a way to just sort of like make sure your draws are smooth in the early game. The common question that people will have is why play Think Twice instead of a different card like Accumulated Knowledge. And I will say that because the deck isn't playing other cantrips, like in Legacy where the Accumulated Knowledge Miracles is really popular, they have like 4 Brainstorm and things like that to help burn through their deck more quickly and double up on the Accumulated Knowledges. Whereas this deck doesn't really have that. And the other thing is that once you're in the late game with this deck, you're kind of like favored already anyway, because this deck doesn't really have that much air in it. Because like if you draw 3 cards off an Accumulated Knowledge in Legacy Miracles, you might draw like a land and then like another Brainstorm and then a Ponder or something, you know, like you're just does that argument even make sense? I don't know. Okay, forget that part. So actually the reason why I think Twice is good, like the late game thing is still the point, right? So this is not very convincing at all now, but bear with me. So like when you play the first AK, like there's a good chance you won't have found a second AK. And then it just cycled, and then now you're sort of haven't really done anything. But the first Think Twice at least can flashback. So it's more, so then you get another card in the like early to mid game. And the early to mid game is the part where this deck needs the most help, right? Because you're a control deck and you stay when you have a lot of mana and you're safe, you clearly stabilize with your Mystical Teachings and so on. Like you don't need to draw extra cards with AK on like turn 7 or whatever. That doesn't really help you that much. But the challenging part is making sure you survive that long. So being able to flashback, like get an extra card off the first Think Twice, which you can never get from the first accumulated knowledge, is the important reason why I think Think Twice is better. So yeah, hopefully that was a better explanation. Then 3 Pristine Talisman. So gaining 1 life every turn, like Ajani's mantra or whatever, is quite useful. Like once you've stabilized against decks that have burn, you don't want to have to save every single counterspell you have or every single lightning bolt they might draw. It's better to just be able to gain some life and get yourself out of range. And the other thing is that, like I mentioned earlier, you can sustain yourself through Evincar's Justice buyback, so that becomes a viable win condition as well. And you're also relatively mana hungry, like you have 6 mana flashback spells that you're trying to cast. So having a mana rock is also not too bad either. And then the Whispers of the Muse. So this is a card kind of like Hieroglyphic Illumination, which was popular in Standard and is seeing some play in Modern now as well. You can just cycle it really early on in the game because it's just a 1 mana draw card. But then in the mid to late game, it's like an infinite source of card advantage. Really good because your deck's trying to play at instant speed. Because the other interesting thing about this deck is that because all of the card advantage spells have flashback, you don't really want to, like, shuffling them in with Cover-Up doesn't achieve anything, and then once you've used them all, you have no card advantage. You have no other card advantage options left in your deck, so your opponent might be able to like play through your 1-for-1s. So I just wanted to have like some sort of extra insurance policy against that. Just like 1 more card advantage type spell. It might be correct that this should just be like a Hieroglyphic Illumination or something along those lines. Some kind of inspiration type effect. But I've been happy with the Whispers of the Muse so far. The cool thing about the way the deck works now with Devious Cover-Up and cards like this is that even if it does have like a really powerful late game effect, you're not sad about burning it for the early game mode, because in the late game you can always just play Devious Cover-Up and shuffle it back, so you never permanently lose access to it, which was the problem, or a problem with the Teachings decks in the past. So there's a few cards that greatly get helped by that, and I'll sort of explain as I go through. So for the counters, we have 2 Cover-Up, 1 Remove Soul, 2 Exclude, and 4 Counterspell. So Counterspell is obviously one of the best cards in Pauper. Still sees play in Legacy. Just blue, answer anything is efficient. I wouldn't say it's too efficient. It's efficient enough, and it's obviously very flexible. So we play 4 Counterspell. 1 Remove Soul, just as an extra counter for creatures. The main threats in Pauper tend to be creatures, and just having another 2 mana option that's a bit easier on the mana seems to be reasonable, but I wouldn't say this card is totally essential. It's just, it has a very high floor basically. Can never really be that bad. Then we have the 2 Cover-Ups, which I've talked about before. How many Cover-Ups to play is quite an interesting question. You don't want to play a lot of these because 4 mana for a cancel is very expensive, and you can just get run over in the early game by decks like Stompy or whatever if you are cutting removal spells to play more of these. And the other thing is that, like, in the control mirrors, your Cover-Ups are like a very important resource. Like if you only have 2 Cover-Ups and then they cover up your Cover-Up, now one of your cover-ups is exiled, so you only have one, so you can't do the loop anymore. So yeah, so that's not good, right? So that seems to be an incentive to play more copies of Cover-Up. But I think I like only having 2 Cover-Ups, because the first reason, like the proactive decks are still like quite a big problem for you. Like you don't want to sacrifice too much of your control deck power by playing these really clunky answers, because all the proactive aggressive decks in Pauper are too efficient. One piece of technology that I have seen somebody or some people, I'm not sure if it's only one guy, but he plays I think only 2 Devious Cover-Ups and some number of Conjurer's Bauble. So if one cover-up is in the graveyard and you can't use another cover-up to get it back, you can activate Conjurer's Bauble on the cover-up. And then later on you can cover up the Conjurer's Bauble, so you have a loop that way. And the 1 mana cantrip is obviously way more efficient than playing extra cover-ups. So I think if I wanted like more edge in the control mirrors, I would play Conjurer's Bauble, more like extra copies of Conjurer's Bauble rather than. I think the first Conjurer's Bauble is better than the 3rd cover-up, is what I'm trying to say basically. Yeah, that's my opinion on that. And then 2 Exclude. So this is basically like 3 mana Cryptic Command in a lot of situations. Counter target creature spell, draw a card. I started playing with only 1, because it's like a bit inefficient. 3 mana to counter a creature spell can be too slow a lot of the time. And so just having 1 is like the most valuable teachings target. Because say you're on you've stabilized the game, right? Like your opponent has an empty board, and you want a teachings for something, because you have a teachings in the graveyard and you have 6 mana, and you don't want to waste it, right? You want to flashback your teachings and try and find something. Like Exclude is the best card that you can find, just because it's like a 2-for-1 that answers anything that they can play. But because it's like a 3 mana clunky answer, it's not something you want to draw a lot of in the early game. So with that rationale, I started by only playing 1. And the other thing is that if you use the first one, it's like a high value card that you can put back in your deck with Cover-Up, and you can always tutor out more copies again later. So I don't think playing 1 copy was even that bad, but it's just good enough that you can afford to play more. So I think 2 is correct. I wouldn't want to play more than 2. I think 2 is the correct number. So that's the counters, and the rest of the deck is literally just all removal. So the first removal is like kind of not really a removal, but kind of a win condition, is Capsize. Just gives you a really powerful angle in any kind of mid-range or control matchup. You know, obviously bouncing all of your opponent's permanents is a legitimate win condition. This is one of the cards that gets improved a lot by having Devious Cover-Up in your deck, because before, if your opponent played Bounce Land early on, it was like a really good tempo play to capsize their Bounce Land with no buyback, because obviously this was early in the game and you couldn't afford the 6 mana to buyback it. But before, if you did that, your Capsize was gone for the rest of the game. Like that was cutting off the path of one of your like best win conditions. But now, if you make that play, you get all the tempo from basically plow undering your opponent, and then also you don't lose the late game angle, because you can use Cover-Up to put the Capsize back in your deck again. So yeah, Capsize, really good in general, really good with Cover-Up. Definitely a card that I'm happy to play. And then the rest of the deck is all just legit removal. So obviously, because you're a teachings deck, like you can play a lot of weird instants, and like there are a lot of choices you can make with this. So I'm playing a bit of a not necessarily an interesting mix, but there's a few one-offs here that are a bit different. So start with the sorceries. I think 2 Evincar's Justice, 2 Evincar's Justice and 3 Talisman is a split that I think I like. So I started with only 1 Justice, again with the logic that if you have to fire it off with no buyback, you can shuffle it back later. But just having the Pyroclasm effect to stabilize versus aggressive decks like Delver and Stompy is too good that you want more than 1 copy in the deck. And then it can be like a legit win condition versus the control decks as well still. So I think 2 copies is fine. I don't think I'd play 1, and I think 3 is too many, like it just puts the curve up too high. So 2 Evincar's Justice I think is good. Then the other sorceries, 2 Chainer's Edict and 3 Innocent Blood. So when I started testing this list, I was playing 4 Chainer's Edict, like that just seemed correct. It was the front half was okay, and you know it's potentially a 2-for-1, so that's great. But the problem was that like if you got to 7 mana, you basically always had other stuff to do. Like you could flashback teachings and find a different removal, or you could like chain 3 your thing twice, or you could buy back a Evincar's Justice, or you could buy back a Capsize, and like it was very rare that I actually wanted to use the flashback on it. So yeah, I cut it down. It's actually not that great. It's still fine, which is why I'm playing 2, but it's definitely not like the automatic 4-of that I assumed it was going to be initially. And then, so Innocent Blood is basically just like the more efficient version. Right? You're not playing any creatures, so the downside of Innocent Blood doesn't affect you. And then ignoring the flashback aspect, Innocent Blood is basically just a 1-mana Chainer's Edict. So it's some of the most efficient removal in Magic. Even though it's not an instant and you're trying to play the game at instant speed and have instants for mystical teachings and so on, Innocent Blood is still worth it. And then I think the rest of the deck is all instants. So we have 2 Diabolic Edicts to complete the Edict package. If you're playing creatures, this is basically almost strictly worse than Devour Flesh, because you can Devour Flesh your own Anglers or your own Augurs versus Burn, for example, to gain life. But we don't have any creatures, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, so I do think you want more than 1 Diabolic Edict, because it's quite common in games that you will want to find multiples with teachings. Like you want more than 1 tutorable edict. So that's simply why I want to have 2. And edict effects generally like become better in multiples to a certain degree. So I think 2 Diabolic Edict is a good number. We have 2 Disfigure. The Black Lightning Bolt, obviously much worse than Lightning Bolt. The reason for playing Disfigure is it's just efficient removal versus things like Delver of Secrets, Stompy. It kills like Frogmite. It kills Flip Delver. So Disfigure also compares with cards like this other one that I'm playing, Tragic Slip. So like, you might think like, how many times is the extra -2 relevant versus like potentially -13 on this, and versus things like a Needle Sentinel or Ninja of the Deep Hours or Flip Delver, or you know, there's plenty of examples where just having more copies of Disfigure is good, and just having this as like a mystical teachings option is fine. That's generally how I view it. This is like a silver bullet for mystical teachings, because a lot of the time you'll have like an edict. Your opponent might have any random creature like an augur or something, and they have something that you really want to kill, like an angler. So you just play the Innocent Blood and they sacrifice the augur, and then you have like your Doomblade option to kill the angler. So, and then it also can kill a Spellstutter Sprite or something like that for 1 mana. So, you know, Tragic Slip I think is really good. Then I have 1 Murder. So I don't like Doomblade in this deck. I think there are too many black creatures in Pauper. Doomblade's a bit of a liability to play. And then if you're having a spot removal as like a teachings target, then you usually have more than 3 mana for this anyway, so Murder is fine. And then in the situations where you're really hung up on mana, constrained on your mana, you have the Tragic Slip option as well. But like, it's very rare that you want exactly Doomblade in a situation where either of these wouldn't do the job, so I think that's fine. Then Echoing Decay. So one thing that you might notice is that like every single removal spell in the deck is like a 1-for-1, or like clearly a lot of them are. Chainer's Edict and, sorry, I don't know if you can see this, Chainer's Edict and Evincar's Justice can be better than a 1-for-1, but they require a ton of mana and they're a bit situational. Just being able to like have the option of getting a 2-for-1, just elegantly kill 2 things for 2 mana is very powerful. Like, I think 1 Echoing Decay is essential, but you don't need more than 1. It's just like a very useful teachings target to have access to. And then the last card I'm playing is a card that I haven't seen other people use at all. It's sort of like my own tech. Is 1 Splendid Agony. So what this does is it's kind of like a black Electrolyze, 3 mana instant. You put 2 -1/-1 counters among any target creatures. So you can kill 2 1/1 Furies, for example, or you can kill the Flip Delver. You just put both -1 counters on the same creature. So that flexibility is really strong. And also the fact that it's -1 counters is really good versus something like ATOG. They can't just pump in response to save their creature. So I used to play like Cower and Fear in the main deck, but the fact that it could not kill creatures with 2 or more toughness, I found like too situational. I think Splendid Agony is like a good compromise that is good against multiple 1 toughness creatures, but also can kill larger things as well. I've been pretty happy with this this card. It's, you know, surprised me how useful it is. So yeah, that's all the main deck. I don't really have a sideboard. That's a bit of an oversight right now. I've been testing it online, but I'm not entirely sure. Excuse me. Not entirely sure what cards I do want. Some number of Dispel is probably like essential. Let's just go through the pile of cards I have here and see if there's anything that I might consider. Oh yeah, okay. So Cremate I think is a really good option to have. In the mirror it's like interesting. Possibly it's like an option to exile cover-ups and so on. But against Tron it's really good. Like versus Mnemonic Wall or Pulse, it's quite a big tempo gain. and effectively card advantage, right? Because you're countering the pulse and drawing a card. I think this is like a solid option, and it's also good versus any kind of reanimated strategy you might come across. Complete Disregard, I don't know why these are foils. Complete Disregard, I think this is pretty good versus specifically Undying cards. Like, you don't really have a way that, you don't really have any other option that profitably interacts with the Stormbound guys. And in some games I've noticed that's a problem. So I think just having an instant that exiles a small creature is definitely a powerful option to have. Yeah, like I said, some number of Dispel is probably good. I think Annul is another card that you probably want as well as Hydroblast. Doomblade could be a fine option for the sideboard, and the matchups we know it's going to be good. Cower and Fear, like I said before, I think this is another option that you probably want, just versus like Elves and things, having the way to kill their whole board that you can tutor with Teachings. Seems like it's an effect that you would want to have. Crypt Incursion is definitely a card that you would want, but I don't have a copy on me right now to show you. Oh yeah, here's Annul. Oh yeah, the other thing that Complete Disregard does is it kills, or it shuts down, yeah, it kills Guardian of the Guild Pact, because it's got Devoid, so it's colorless. In the past, some people have used Agony Warp to do this job, but I don't think this card is really that good. 2 mana, give a creature -3/-3. It's just a little bit too weak, I think. And the upside of killing Guardian of the Guild Pact isn't that good when you have so many edicts already that can deal with it anyway. Augur of Bolas is a good card, but it just has no synergy with the Innocent Bloods. If I wasn't playing Innocent Blood, I think I would be playing Augur, because it's just a really good defensive option. And it gives you like another win condition almost, like you can just win by beating down with Augurs. But yeah, I don't think it's worth it when you're playing Innocent Blood. And it was also really painful, like when you whiff with this. A lot of the time you just want to hold up your mana for like Counterspell and Think Twice and things anyway, so maybe it's not that good after all, really. And then Ghastly Demise is a card that I tried for a while, but in the end I just not killing black things was too annoying, and I just found that like Tragic Slip plus Murder plus all the edicts and so on just like covered all my bases in that regard anyway, so I don't think this is that great. And then one weird option, Shadow Feed, just like a black healing cell basically. It's also additional graveyard hate versus Tron, which is probably okay. I think you might want Relic instead, just for Tron and versus the Mirror. It's very hard to play through just having one card in your graveyard exiled every turn. But versus Burn, just having a way to gain 3 life. Because a lot of Burn variants hardly play any creatures, so Crypt Incursion's not reliable life gain. I thought about playing Death of 1,000 Stings for a while, and I think that's not too bad of an idea, but I think it just might be a bit too slow. Yeah, so Shadow Feed is a bit of a strange one, but it might be okay. And then another card which I think might be alright is not Stormbound Geist, Stormrider Spirit. The 3/3 flash flying for 5 mana, just because it's like a threat that you can find with Mystical Teachings, and a lot of opponents are probably trimming or cutting or removal versus you. So in those more like mid-rangey matchups, you might want to have it as just an additional win condition. Plus it can be okay just as like a blocker, or not the most efficient thing, but could be some situations where your opponent struggles to deal with it after sideboarding. So yeah, I like the I like the main 60. I think this is a deck that I would be happy to register in a tournament, but you just got to figure out the sideboard, I think. So yeah, that's the deck. Mystical Teachings, Cover-Up. Any questions, comments, make sure you post those below. Thanks for watching. This is Li-Fi TCG signing out.